Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Qualtrics XM Community Podcast. I'm Michael Cooksey. I'm the head of community. And today we are embarking upon a two-part podcast series with Carson Bell from InVision Communications. Carson, how are you today?
I'm doing great. Hi, everyone. I'm really excited to be a part of this podcast, and I know we're going to have some great conversation today, Michael.
Absolutely. We have a lot in store for everybody who's listening today. As I mentioned, this is going to be a two-part podcast because we have so much that we want to cover. But I think the best place to start, Carson, is learning a little bit more about you. Would you mind telling us about yourself and about InVision and the work you do?
Of course. So, InVision, we are a communications agency that specializes in engaging audiences through impactful, connected experiences. And our main goal is to move these audiences to action. And our way of doing that is by defining objectives and really trying to humanize our messages to extend reach. So we have a dedication to lasting change, and we leverage all of our different integrated solutions grounded in data-driven insights and couple that with creativity and sustained efforts to make these amazing engagements and campaigns. My role personally is a strategy program manager. And basically, what that means is I ensure projects and deliverables move smoothly towards completion and, of course, in a timely manner. So I'm primarily working with our strategy team, really focused on business objectives and the outcomes that they're trying to achieve. But through that, we know there's a lot of other teams involved. So coordinating with the strategist, the design, copy, our digital and production teams, working on plans, thinking through deliverables, and of course, getting them across the finish line as quickly as we can.
Right, absolutely. That's a great introduction into what InVision does. And of course, since we are Qualtrics, we love the data-based approach that you mentioned, of course. InVision has been a Qualtrics customer for some time. And as Carson just mentioned, we both share a love of data and actioning that data and making
Mm-hmm.
sure that the results are what we all intend the results to be. So
Exactly.
today we are going to talk about a couple of things. One, we're going to talk about employee feedback and enablement. That's a big topic for everybody, not just InVision and not just Qualtrics, but everybody in the community. We're also going to talk about taking that data and actioning employee feedback and engagement, how to look at that data in a really smart, intelligent, and intentional way, and make sure that the outcomes are what everybody desires them to be. So with
Exactly.
that, let's just dive in and talk a bit about Qualtrics, InVision, and how you're currently using the platform today.
Definitely. So the first place I went to when Michael and I started talking about having this conversation was feedback. Of course, we understand it's important. Metrics should be the foundation to all of our action. We want to make sure we're grounded in something. But oftentimes it can be forgotten to look internally for that feedback. So at InVision, we do a really great job of trying to make feedback a priority. Anytime we have an internal event or an internal initiative, we want to benchmark at the beginning and then we want to report back at the end. We want to ensure that pain points are identified and that we're addressing them directly to specific employee concerns. Oftentimes, we'll have these great big events, and then at the end, you don't really know how people have felt throughout the process or what they think was the most beneficial. How do we improve upon the successes that we've had one year into the next? And we try to make it a priority to get the feedback quickly while it's fresh on everyone's mind, because that real-time feedback is critical to improving our culture and our operations. I'm sure many other companies do the same.
Mhm.
But when Michael and I first started discussing how Qualtrics is involved at InVision and in our everyday work, that was
Mhm.
the first place that I went.
Yeah, absolutely. And as I mentioned before, it's really top of mind for everybody these days. I think if we just take a look at the market itself
Mhm.
and what's currently happening in our economy, the job market,
Mhm.
the movements that employees are making, the employee experience is just as important as it's ever been. And
Completely.
one of the things that's really important that we match with the data-driven approach is also that sense of trust
Mm-hmm.
too, that people feel like true change is going to come as a result of the data that we're collecting through these surveys.
Well,
Um,
and taking
yeah,
that a step further, Michael, it makes people feel valued. It makes people feel
yes.
heard and appreciated in their organization. And
Mm,
often sending out surveys, trying to collect feedback, if people aren't seeing that action after they've shared their information or they've given their
right.
perspective, they could be hesitant to engage moving forward.
Absolutely.
So, and especially as it relates to culture, I know, I mean, these past few years with the pandemic and the lockdowns and remote work and back to office,
Mm,
want to make sure employees have a lot of power right now. We're able to say, we're interested in working from home or we're not interested in working from home. And so getting that feedback and then taking it a step further, actioning against it really kind of bolsters that culture and that rapport almost even between higher ups and regular old employees.
absolutely. I think that's sometimes a missing element for people. I think that it's really easy to get carried away by the data-based approach to things and collecting data, but then forgetting, sometimes people forget or they lose track of the thread that this has to be backed up by a true altruistic desire to create change, positive change for people, to improve either the employee or customer experience, depending, and
Mm-hmm.
also uh, building that trust, which is the foundation for everything in business these days, no matter where you're located in the world. If your employees or customers don't have a strong sense of trust, uh, you're just not going to be very successful in your business. And
Definitely.
this is an opportunity to build trust with employees by showing them, like you're saying, we value what you have to say, and we're going to follow through on the data you've given us in the following manner or in the following ways.
Exactly. And I think that we've learned over the years as data has become so much more easily accessible, people love seeing it. I mean, look at the success of Spotify Wrapped. It takes over cities, it takes over billboards. People are
Yes,
posting it on social media. We love to see that data kind of fed back to us in an interesting and unique way. So
absolutely.
potentially, who knows, there might be an InVision Wrapped in the future, but
That
I
would
do
be great. I
think
would love to see
I
that.
would read it. I would listen to it.
Yeah.
But I think it also kind of lends itself to when we look at externally, not just for InVision, how we utilize this data. When we look externally working with clients, one of the things that we like to say is the employee experience is the foundation of business excellence. We
Mm,
understand that for a business to excel, for a business to grow, everyone internally needs to be aligned and working towards a common goal. So, regardless of the industry or if it's an event or it's a campaign, in order to push business objectives, you have to have a foundation of engaged employees.
no,
And another
absolutely.
kind of, oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was just agreeing with you. I think you're absolutely on the right track. There were two things that emerged just for me while you were speaking. One is the concept of psychological safety as well
Mhm.
at work. I think that a lot of the data that employers collect on the employee experience feeds into the psychological safety element in the workplace, and it supports the psychological safety element for employees as well, because it shows that, again, we care about what you're saying, we care about the feedback, and we're going to action it in the following ways. And the other thing that emerged while you were speaking is the supportive culture and the general culture of your company. It comes through in the interactions with your external customers.
Mhm.
External customers can always tell things are going well at this company or things are not going well at this company based on their interactions, because everything that's happening, in the house, so to speak, bleeds out into your interactions externally. So
Definitely. We
yeah.
have a data point that we like to point to often to that point, especially Michael, is strong employee engagement. We have seen that customer experience excels to the tune of an 89% larger customer satisfaction and then 60% greater loyalty. Because if you think about it, if you're working with a company, you see how they treat everyone that they're working with day to day. There's no way that they're not going to treat you in the same way. There's no way they're not going to value your input, act
Mhm.
upon it in the best way that they can.
Yep.
Um, And in InVision specifically, the employee life cycle is something that we're very interested in. Our strategy team works a lot on employer brand engagements and campaigns to make sure that we're driving towards the same goal, which I mentioned before, because it might be surprising. Sometimes a message doesn't translate across an organization. Right. So that foundational alignment is perfect in order to get everyone working towards a common goal. Additionally, bringing that to the forefront, putting it front facing, gathering the feedback, validates the work that we're doing. Not only if we're trying to do an external message, for example, if our internal team isn't aligned with that message, how are we going to get alignment externally?
Right, exactly.
So ensuring that those kind of touch points are backed by your internal organization before you then push it externally will just ensure its success even further.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Do you have any examples that you can share for recent examples, maybe at InVision? I don't want to put you on the spot or ask you to share anything that you're not authorized to share, of course, but I'm just sort of curious if you have any real life examples that are top of mind for you about listening to employee feedback at InVision and then making change based on the results.
Sure. So one internal example that pops to mind is each year we like to do a company offsite where the whole company comes together. We have a few days all together focused on speaking to business objectives, speaking to changes forthcoming for the company overall, but also it's a great opportunity for camaraderie. So I remember my very first year, I had started with InVision maybe a week to 2 weeks before this offsite. So I kind of had fresh eyes, fresh experience going in. When they provided the post-event survey, I was able to say, I would like a little bit more intentional networking. I would like someone to help me further my profile at the company, help me further my relationships. Next year, facilitated networking, a part of the conversation, a part of our offsite. So for me personally, I felt heard, I felt understood. And even to that end, we're integrating a campaign for post-event communications internally to further our objectives and keep everyone on the team involved. We set goals, we set promises and made commitments that the company is helping us follow through on. And that's all based on feedback. And I think that culture is a huge part of InVision overall. It's often something that we pride ourselves on. We were nominated as one of the best workplaces. But it also is actually grounded in true reality. We're doing feedback, we're doing surveys, we're collecting feedback. It's not just something that we're saying we're acting on it.
Right.
And I myself have been the beneficiary of a lot of it.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I appreciate that internal insight. I love to hear that InVision is following through and listening to the voice of the employee. And again, that just supports what we've talked about today is supported employees who feel valued, who feel heard, just generally have better output, and that output impacts the customer experience as well. There's a natural organic flow through for all of these things,
Exactly. And it's not a huge lift. It's very easy to do. It's very easy to engage your employees because they're interested. They want to have conversations. We've seen so many trends in professional literature and research that the C-suite is becoming more accessible and people want them to be more accessible. Conversations are not stuck in a vacuum any longer. People are sharing perspectives across the board. And the more that you can further that at your business, the stronger you're going to be with customer connection. Speaking to that data point earlier, we have the metrics to back it up. So everybody just needs to get on the bus and start getting that feedback.
Exactly. And I think everything we're discussing as well also feeds into the overall employee life cycle and also the longevity of an employee within a company. There's so much to be said for, this is just a personal thing that I've really waked up to in the last 5 years or so, is this concept of institutional knowledge. I think a lot of times when it comes to employees and how companies view the talent that they have in-house, a lot of times it's viewed as a business function. For example, this
Exactly.
person can accomplish or can do
Mhm.
XYZ skill or task. And I understand that a lot of employees begin their journeys at companies that way. A lot of
Right.
times they're hired for skill, hired for talent. But this concept of institutional knowledge that deepens and broadens itself throughout the tenure of an employee, that's something that really can't be uh, measured or
Right.
at least in a really smart and accurate way. But it has such a deep impact on a company and its long-term success at both the team level, the individual contributor level, at the leadership level, and of course at the business level. And
Right.
so I think when people are really tuned into these details that we're discussing about collecting great intentional employee feedback and applying it, it builds trust, it plays into the longevity, it plays into all of the points that you mentioned, and it could potentially also increase the level of institutional knowledge and the quality of institutional knowledge because employees are more inclined to stay longer term
Right.
because they feel like they're being heard. They feel like their voice is being heard. They feel trusted. They feel valued. And that longevity and all of that greatness that comes with it is a data point that can't be ignored either.
Right. And I think it also speaks to, I mean, we're on a community podcast. You want your
Mhm.
company to feel like a community. We live
Yes,
in communities all the time. Those communities are sharing feedback, collaborating, and that tribal knowledge, like you were just speaking to, you can't bottle it up. We wish we
right.
could, but we
Yeah,
can't. And
exactly.
we try to all the time at InVision, after, especially
Hmm.
after our offsite.
Hmm.
But it fosters a different type of energy within your organization that, like we've said multiple times, seeps out into everything that you do. And
Yeah.
it truly is a very easy thing to implement. Like I say, we do it internally, but then we also do recommend it for our clients. It's a great way to get an understanding of how you're perceived internally, and
Hmm.
then what potentially could be going on internally that you don't know about. And this could be directly related to business operations, how people feel about vacation, how people feel about working from home. But it
Hmm.
also could be about how the company presents itself in the world. I mean, looking at younger generations, activism is a huge part of our values. It's a huge part of why we align ourselves with companies. So ensuring that you're taking the pulse and the barometer of everyone around you
Hmm.
for all facets of business, not just the day-to-day operations, but how we're presenting in the marketplace, what we're standing for, what we're representing. That's critical as well.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. You gave me a great podcast idea just a moment ago, which is that everything is really and truly community. That's a
Really.
great distinction to draw here.
Mm,
That, we are on a community podcast, like you said, and that the internal employee experience is often like a community experience.
exactly.
A lot of the learnings that people take from managing communities can absolutely be applied to the workplace. You gave me an aha moment today. I'd never made that connection before. You just mentioned it, and I think that's so smart. That is so smart. I am absolutely. You'll have to come back for part three, and we'll do a podcast on that topic.
Exactly, exactly. It's just as generations get younger and younger, our priorities have changed, and
Yeah.
taking note of that is the only way to move forward in the most successful way you can.
Absolutely. I think you made a great point. And that again ties back into that point of psychological safety as well.
Exactly.
Knowing the company appreciates the employee experience. And I think what's especially important these days, as you pointed out, is uh, the company values. Is this company mirroring the same uh, cultural, societal values that are important to me as an employee? Or
Exactly.
does the company stand up for what I believe in as well? I think, as you've pointed out, gone are the days of this strict disconnect between what's happening in our world at a societal level and then the work world. Everything
Exactly.
everything bleeds together nowadays, thanks to technology, where
Mhm.
everything is integrated and everything is connected.
Well, and I can't take all the credit for this. We did some research a while back on beta buyers, and that's kind of this younger generation of millennials, Gen Xers, and almost even Generation Alpha that are moving into these decision maker roles. And beta means blurred. Everything is the B in beta, excuse me, stands for blurred. Everything is blurred. Our personal lives are a part of our work. We're blending everything together. Now, whether that was a catalyst from the pandemic or not, I'm not quite sure, but I do think it's something to take note of as we move forward in business operations and in everyday life.
Oh, 100%. I mean, I can share from a personal perspective that, I think I have the benefit of straddling really a couple of different eras, I think, in terms of professional themes, professional trends, professional moments that have stretched across time. When I initially began my career, I'm Gen X, and so we were of this, we were taught, don't question anything, just, be grateful you have a job, do your job, do it well, and don't take it for granted, essentially. And you do what your employer asks you to do. And then as things have changed over time, I think everybody, Gen X and everybody, is waking up to this realization that the experience we want to have in our non-work worlds, we want to have that mirrored in our work worlds as well. And so people have really opened their eyes to, like you've mentioned, societal issues, social justice issues around activism. And I know that for me, before I took this job at Qualtrics, I did a lot of research about what does Qualtrics believe in? What do they stand for? And does it align with who I am? And of course, spoiler alert, it does align. I'm here in my Qualtrics t-shirt with my Qualtrics background, running the Community podcast. But I absolutely did that research. And I also, there was another company that had reached out to me before I joined Qualtrics. And I was looking for very concrete information on their equal opportunity employment best practices and beliefs. I think a lot of times in the US, there are, of course, laws at the state level, the federal level, that everybody has to adhere to when it comes to equal opportunity employment options. But companies can also define on their own what they choose to include above and beyond that,
right,
which plays into the employee experience.
Right.
Are they stating things in this values statement, which essentially it is, as well as a legal statement, that align with who I am and what I believe in? And will I feel psychologically safe at work? Not just based on the feedback, but also this company's overall belief system. And I'm really glad things have changed. I'm happy to have witnessed it over the course of my career, and I'm really happy with the way things are evolving in general, all based on employee feedback. And it just proves that people really do have the power to enact change.
Certainly. I mean, you made the great point of Gen X didn't question everything. Millennials and Gen Z were questioning everything. We want everyone to be meeting our standards. Now, whether that's the way that things should be run or not is not up for discussion, but it's our current reality. And I think one thing that InVision also proved to me is we are an ESOB. We are an employee-owned agency. When that was announced, they said our greatest asset is our employees.
Yeah.
Imagine hearing that as an employee. This wonderful company that you're a part of, that you're working day in and out, comes to you and says, you are our most valuable resource. I mean, how can that not bolster you in a way to want to perform better, advocate for the company, engage in things that maybe aren't necessarily on your job description, but you want to be a part of it. So yeah. I know that I'm extremely grateful to be a part of a company that realizes that. It seems as though you are as well, but it's also, again, taking notice of what's important to your employees, whether that be your processes or your benefits or just the way that you conduct business. It's taking notice of that and acting on it.
Yeah, absolutely. There's also this notion that emerged for me while we were speaking about change and change management. So we touched on the fact that generationally things have changed. There have been these different eras in the workforce in general that we've all seen over the course of time, in terms of how people interact, or the relationships that they have with their employers,
Mhm.
and the relationships employers have with their people. I'm curious to hear from your perspective, somebody who perhaps is embarking on this journey for the first time.
Mhm.
Maybe they are somebody who has not historically put a lot of weight or value on the voice of the employee
Mhm.
to enact feedback. And maybe it's a little bit scary because,
Mhm.
uh, just to
Once
go
you
back
start
to
peeling the onion, you don't know what the layers are.
exactly. Like, just to go back to that Gen X example I gave of, when I was fresh out of college, the culture at the time was get a job, any job, love it, do
Mhm.
it well, and don't question.
Mhm.
So people who were leaders in that generation and maybe are still leaders now, they may not have yet embarked upon this journey of
Mhm.
that mind shift and culture shift that's required of
Mhm.
valuing the employee voice.
Definitely.
So
Definitely.
I'm just curious if anything comes to mind for you for people who are of any age, of any generation, embarking on this journey for the first time of collecting employee feedback. It can be scary when you're confronted with truths that maybe you weren't prepared to hear. Um,
Mhm.
so, what would your advice for those people be?
My advice, so thinking back to kind of the process that we like to do when embarking on situations such as this, sometimes they're with existing clients who have decided that they want to go through kind of an employer brand engagement exercise, or it's brand new people that say we're very interested in doing this. We really start with research and discovery. That's where we ground everything, and a part of that is the metrics, the feedback, the benchmarking.
Yep.
I think you have to have an air of humility to
Yes,
understand that these are perspectives. Sometimes they've been bottled up maybe for a little while. They need to be released. I think coming in with a mindset that it's a conversation is critical as well.
absolutely. Yeah.
It's not just looking at facts and figures and actioning against it. It's actually having a conversation. And we often advocate, sometimes even utilizing Qualtrics to gain feedback afterwards, doing interviews, having conversations with people face to face, to hear their inflection, to see their body language, to see the way that they conduct themselves differently depending on the topic. I know in InVision, we did a large exercise about understanding people's needs as it related to physical offices. So we wanted to talk with different departments. We wanted to talk with people from different tenures. We wanted to talk to employees that were full-time remote, employees that became remote. We wanted to cover the gamut.
Mm.
And we really did try to go in with a humble mindset and a conversation mindset. I think that often we can get potentially our feathers in a ruffle whenever we hear feedback that's negative, but
Mhm.
often there's always a positive to anything that people can say. There's always an opportunity to any sort of negative feedback. And if you try to encourage that, our strategists are fabulous and are able to pull together information in a way that makes it digestible, that makes it not as daunting. But again, starting at that ground floor, research, discovery, conversation, surveying, feedback, getting
Mhm.
getting an initial pulse and then actioning against that um,
Yes.
would be my recommendation. I know humility is difficult for everyone, but
Right. It is, but it's so necessary, isn't it? You
exactly.
really have to get your mind right and
Mm-hmm.
adopt that humble,
Mm-hmm.
almost learner's mentality. I'm here to learn from these data points. These data points
Exactly.
are telling me a story, and you have
Mm-hmm.
to be prepared for that story. All of
Exactly.
the good that's happening, and maybe the opportunities to do better as well.
Well, and just an eye on this is a part of a process. This is a part of a growth opportunity. This is a
Mhm.
part of an expansion opportunity. This is a part of bringing together my company.
Yes.
Not
Mhm.
all roads are smooth and not all roads are straight, but there's an end to the road at a certain point.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. The employee feedback process does not stop at a negative data point, for example. That's just the beginning. And it
Mm-hmm.
goes back to what we said before about uh, building a foundation of trust that will pay dividends in the long run. So I think for anybody, I mean, just for me, I guess, for anybody who's getting started on this journey, and going into it with a mindset, just making sure you're going into it with a learner's mindset, a mindset of humility. I'm here to learn about the stories this data is telling me, and that this is just the beginning of the journey. And it's a springboard to building a foundation of trust that is going to have such a huge organic impact, positive impact on the business, our relationships with our customers, our relationships internally. Yeah, it's really important not to fixate on any news that could be labeled as, I don't know, bad news, for example.
Exactly. All bad news is an opportunity. All challenges are a chance to make things better and function more efficiently or more holistically. There's always opportunity. And I think one of the main things is to reassure people that results are not just the endpoint. Results are another starting line for another group of tactics and initiatives. It's only a piece of the whole puzzle. And don't get too hung up on anything.
Exactly. You can't really spend, you don't want to pay rent in that mindset or that spot of, oh, things are bad, and then fixate on that.
Exactly.
There's another parallel I'm drawing here, which is, for me in my spare time, I'm a musician. I do classical music. And, I think what we're discussing has a lot of parallels. If I go into a lesson, if I go into a performance and something doesn't go well, I can't, or even just in an individual practice session at home, I can't focus on that one thing that didn't go well for overly too long, because that's going to impact the rest of either the performance, the lesson, the whatever's happening in that moment. And I would never grow if I fixated on those not so great elements. And all of those things, all of the feedback that my teachers give me, it all just influences and impacts future performances and makes me better in the long run. So I think there are a lot of parallels that people can
when you're playing. If you miss a note when you're playing, you're not going to stop the entire song, are you?
Correct.
You're going to power through and then come up with a big crescendo at the end to make up for it. So
exactly. And
it's
sometimes
very achievable.
It is absolutely achievable. And very often those flawed performances end up being the most emotionally moving for people.
Exactly.
It's really not about getting things technically correct, which I think is what we're kind of describing here when it comes to actioning employee feedback. It's not necessarily about getting things right or wrong. It's really about the overall experience and building that trust and having a true, honest, genuine connection with your employees. That's another thing that I think has positively shifted over the course of my career, and I think just the professional world in general.
For sure. There's much more value on you as a human being than just a task doer or a task rabbit or a list checker. You're actually a part of a whole, for lack of a better word, family or community, like we've said. You're a part of it now. And that raises all ships. Rising tides raise all ships. If we're all feeling driven towards a common goal, we're all feeling supported, we're all feeling heard, and we feel engaged, it's only going to propel our business and our clients' businesses further.
Yeah, absolutely. Everything is interconnected.
Exactly.
And my experience as an employee is connected to somebody else's experience as an employee, because my interactions with that person are colored by my experience and informed by my experience. And if my experience is not great, or I feel like there's not a basis of trust, that's going to impact my the interconnectedness and the interactions I have with this other person. And then there's a domino effect from there.
Exactly. So, a consideration of previous experience is a great call out as well. I mean, we each approach situations differently. I know myself in my program management role, whenever we kick off a meeting, I want to talk about communication styles. It's such a minute, like very, very, very small detail. But if you have someone that's primarily an auditory learner and you're trying to send them documents and have them review things, no, they need a conversation. So on top of all of this, I feel like we've also leaned more into personalization and meeting people where they are, which is critical as well.
That itself is also another podcast episode too. We could dedicate, or even a talk at X4, we could dedicate a whole session to that topic, meeting people where they are, taking the whole person into account,
For
uh,
sure.
and making sure we don't ever lose track of the humanity behind our workforce and what they're telling us through data stories as well.
We like to say at InVision, we want you to bring your whole self to work, whether that
Mhm.
be like you, Michael, a musician, or me,
Mhm.
who really loves to watch trashy reality TV. We
Yeah,
bring our whole selves to work.
yes, we do.
And it makes everyday operations stronger and better. And you just feel valued, which is critical because you work all day long, every day, all day.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. We are working with our fellow humans, just like we interact with people in our everyday lives. If we're out at the store or running errands or just bumping into people on the street, it's really important to take that into consideration. And I think that notion of bringing your whole self to work is really important. And all of the data your employees are going to give you through engagement surveys, through getting a finger on the pulse of what's happening at the company, all of that data is going to inform the whole experience. It's all very cyclical. That if one thing has emerged for me today in our conversation is the fact that it's all very, very cyclical. Everything is connected. There's
Everything.
nothing that exists solely alone in silos and that's not impacted by anything else.
And over and above that, that's a good thing. It's a good thing that we're not as siloed. It's a
Oh
good thing
yeah.
that there's visibility. It's a good thing that there's communication, and staying in the traditional mindset of operations is only going to keep you kind of stuck in a place in time.
Mhm.
Agility, flexibility, and engagement is the future. And you got to get on the bus, like I said.
Yeah, absolutely. This is not an area where companies want to be left behind because
Right.
that will impact your business. Yeah, absolutely.
Definitely.
So, final thoughts on employee engagement, collecting data, collecting feedback, actioning that feedback. I think some of the main themes that we've touched on today are one, you've got to mentally prepare yourself for this journey you're about to take, adopt a learner's mindset, a mindset of humility, perhaps a service-based leadership approach. I'm here to be of service to my employees. The data they're giving me is an opportunity for me to be of service to them and create real change. I think that's a big takeaway for folks. I think also leaning into the humanity of business is another big takeaway for people who are beginning their journeys, or even elsewhere in their journeys when it comes to collecting employee feedback and actioning results and making the employee experience better. Um,
And then, of course, interconnectedness, like we said.
Interconnectedness, yes,
Everything is connected, and it all one begets the other, and it should be seen as kind of a battle cry or a charge, even to go in with the mindset that you've mentioned, with the opportunities that you've mentioned, and an understanding that everything is going to bolster each other if you take this approach going into it.
absolutely. I would love for this discussion to continue on the XM community. I'm hoping that anybody who's listening to this podcast or watching this podcast will comment on this episode with their thoughts about anything that we've touched on today. I'm especially interested to hear not just from our customers here in North America, but around the world, because I'm fascinated also. An area we didn't really get into is the layer of local culture and customs on the work experience. I would be fascinated to learn how uh, the employee experience is handled in other parts of the world that I'm not as familiar with, and what the employee experience looks like there. And I'm also curious to hear from any community members or anybody within the Qualtrics universe about getting started on this process, and maybe if they have any sort of templates or question types that they're using in their Qualtrics surveys to elicit data from employees. I would be fascinated to see some best practices from our customers around the world. So I'm hopeful that we have a lot of folks who chime in with their thoughts in the comments. And I would also encourage customers, if they have questions, to tag you, Carson, perhaps on the community with their questions. I'll make sure that your community username is in the description of this episode so people can Mention You if they have questions or comments.
Of course. I think that sounds wonderful. And I appreciate the time together to talk about this. I'm excited for episode 2. I hope everyone comes back. And I think this is valuable work. I think this is really important internally and externally. Our generation, us as employees, we have a lot of power right now, and we need to use it in an effective way to better our businesses, to better ourselves, and to better the industries at large.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm looking forward to our next discussion as well. We're going to be talking about engaged audiences at events and also tips for implementing Qualtrics strategies and looking towards the future. So there's a lot to unpack there as well. Carson, thank you very much for joining us for part 1 today. It was a fabulous discussion. Everybody make sure to chime in or tune in to part 2 and chime in with your thoughts in the comments on this podcast episode.
Thanks so much, Michael. It was a pleasure to be here and look forward to hearing from everyone.